one of the requirements is a holiday on every mortgage for a year. Don't pay a mortgage for a year. Let that be the first payment from the $900 billion. Put it at the bottom. We'd had 4, 5, maybe even 6% growth again. We bailed out the automobile industry, and 2/3 of the black dealerships were cut. So President Obama saved the nation, but he did not save black people or poor people. He might have even saved the world. See, but Dr. King's life was ended because he wanted to help the poor. And we've still not figured out how to do that, except there are a lot of people working on it. And I think that's one of the places I see things like people deciding that, okay, we can't depend on the government to help end poverty. We got to do it ourselves. We've got to find ways to improve our credit. We've got to, we've traded most educated people, white and black and brown and everything else, traded their chains for plastic slavery. And in your pocket and in mine, there are a bunch of credit cards that put a severe limitation on any decision you can make. And then they might charge you as much as 13% interest if you do make it. That's another sophisticated form of slavery. And you can't start a business, you can't buy a home if you're in debt. So you got to start. We're starting to try to educate poor people that you are your own solution to poverty. That's going back all the way to Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass and the Freedmen's Bank. People coming out of slavery knew what they wanted. They wanted land and they wanted energy. 40 acres and a mule. And can you imagine what this nation would have been like with 4 million slaves who knew farming? We would have run the nation. Because the people who were coming from Europe that they brought in, that they did give land to on land grants, they had to set up colleges to teach them how to farm. It took us almost 200 years to figure out how to run agriculture. The slaves knew how to run agriculture and could have done that for the world if it hadn't been for the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So we're picking up, doing things ourselves that the government let us down on. But with these computers in our pockets, and I'm amazed that, my granddaughter's 7, and she'll run along on a hovercraft that I can't even stand on, and she'll be working with a computer looking up stuff and riding around the house, playing and working the mind at the same time. I said, it's like the little girl on 60 Minutes that is 12 years old and writing symphonies. There is human capacity that is being developed in this. The arts are part of the civil society. The symphonies are part of the civil society. There's genius bubbling up all over the world, but not in government yet. It's going to take a good while to develop a democratic consensus about anything. But that's enough.
Since you spoke of your 100-year vision of life, how did you decide what to do after 1965?
Well, after 1965, I knew that was just the beginning. And we had to continue Dr. King's work, and we did have a political consensus then. And so the political consensus was one around human rights and human dignity and human freedom. And that's sort of what the March on Washington was about. And that created a national consensus around human rights. And it was interesting to me that as soon as Dr. King won the Nobel Prize, first person he heard from was Albert Lutuli from South Africa, who had won the Nobel Prize previously. And they collaborated on a statement about human rights in Russia, in South Africa, in the Middle East, Panama, Asia. And that was the consensus that we were left with after Dr. King's assassination. And I ended up being the only one who was willing to try to run for Congress. And Nixon, you're too young to remember, but Nixon developed a Southern strategy that wanted to divide the South black and white, and the best way we figured we could deal with that was to keep the black and white coalition together, and Atlanta was as good a place as any to do it. And so I was elected in a district in 1972 that was only 38% black. And I had to have a significant participation from the white community to get elected. Let me just go on and say that when that led to my going to Congress, Jimmy Carter getting elected president, because, you know, I couldn't imagine. We're all prejudiced against people who talk different. And Jimmy Carter was a friend of mine whom I knew and trusted and loved, but I couldn't imagine a person with an accent that strong from South Georgia getting the respect of enough people in the North. But the reason he got it, I think, was because he had the devotion of Martin Luther King Sr. and Coretta Scott King, and the whole King family embraced his candidacy, and that created a coalition that put him over and elected him president. And he took me to the UN, and the first thing he asked me to do was go to South Africa, and this is very significant. Ask African leaders what they expect of this administration and how we can help them. Now, you can't find anywhere in history an American president asking a person of a third world country their opinion, even about their own countries. We normally send messages telling the people what we want to do for them. And so Jimmy Carter had, and that's the significant thing, that's a significant difference, and then I'm going to have to quit because I'm getting too deep in this, and but you need to get there. When I went into South Africa, they didn't want me to talk to the South African whites. They set up meetings for me with all the liberation movement leaders, and I said, these are my friends, all of the white liberals. I said, I met with them 4 years ago when I came here with Arthur Ashe. I said, who are the ones that are blocking progress? Oh, you don't want to meet with them. Why not? That's who you have to meet with. Well, they don't want to talk to you. I said, have you ever asked? And so we decided that P.W. Botha. Pick Botha was a kind of liberal. He was at the UN. He and I talked all the time. But I said, who is the meanest SOB you got? And he was defense minister. So I said, at least I want to ask to meet with him. And he met me with me. He asked me 3 questions. First thing he said, why would white people vote for you? I said, well, they figured we're going to have to get along, and they knew me, and they figured they'd take a chance with me. Then the guy that had been there and hadn't done anything for him about anything, you know, and so he said, and he said, how much intermarriage you all have in the United States? I said, you know, I mean, there is intermarriage, but really not that much to my knowledge. I said, we don't go around checking DNA, but in terms of just, you know, looks, I don't think there's been very much intermarriage at all in the South or the North. And then the next question was the one that broke the camel's back for me. He said, how long do you think we have before the bloodbath? I said, the bloodbath? Why would you have a bloodbath? He said, surely one of these days, these people are going to rise up and kill us all after the way we've been treating them. I said, look, I don't believe that. He said, well, why wouldn't they? I said, I don't know, but I said, I don't know Nelson Mandela, but I know Oliver Tambo, and I knew Chief Lutuli, and I said, they went to missionary schools that were founded by the same missionaries that founded the schools that Martin Luther King and I went to. And I said, they were also right next to Gandhi when he formed the Indian National Congress, and he went back to India, and he liberated India, and I don't think they killed a single Englishman. Not one. He said, you think that could happen here? And I said, that's what President Carter wants to help to make happen. And that's the way we ended it. But I think that once he realized that we were not trying to overcome hatred with hatred, or we were not trying to get even, but we were really willing to overcome evil with love. And just the thought that that was possible, I think, planted a seed in 1977, which it took till 1994 to grow into the liberation of South Africa. But now is the time to be planting seeds and nurturing them. And that's going to have to be done by civil society. And it might be done by some businesses, but all progress is not going to be profitable. And we have people who are going to make it profitable to go to the moon, but they may not be interested in having clean water on Earth. That's going to be a hard investment. And so the things that our foundation has tried to do is do the things that business won't do, that government won't do, but that need doing if we're going to survive as a planet. And my little agenda, this is my bucket list that I sort of started putting down at 75. I found something called duckweed. It grows all over the world and everybody thinks it's disgusting. It causes trouble. But we refine some of it, and it gives off pure ethanol, and what's left is a 47.5% protein that we are now working with the World Bank and the African Development Bank, a dozen land-grant colleges, Rutgers and Texas A&M, to see how we could grow this in an organized and commercial way. And because if we can do that, we could end famine and hunger in India. India's problem is not a lack of food, but a lack of protein. And this is a vegetable protein which Hindus, and even Jain Hindus, who don't want to swat a fly, would encourage. And that's one thing. The other thing is, if you grow this, one of the ways to grow this is with aquaponics. And you can grow 5 times as much food with 1/5 of the water that you can on land. And in terms of space, you can grow as much in 2 acres of land in a third of an acre in water, as much as you can on 10 acres of land, and it's much cheaper and no pesticides, everything else. That's the second thing. The third thing is that I grew up in New Orleans, and I grew up on the Mississippi River, and it's been flooding since I was a boy, and they have not done a thing to protect that river since I was 4 years old. 1936 was the last time they put a major investment into the Mississippi River. And it does $101 billion worth of damage every decade. And nobody fixes it. At the same time, I read in this book that water is going to be more valuable than oil in the rest of the world. And here we've got the mightiest river in the world, surrounded by the greatest amount of talent. We've got the greatest universities, I mean, from starting in Minnesota and coming on down to Mississippi and Louisiana. You've got universities, you've got engineering firms, you've got banks, you've got all of the talent that's necessary to turn the Mississippi River into a tremendous asset. The power of the Mississippi flowing south, you know, can generate enough energy to light up cities so that you don't have to have nuclear energy. I mean, there's so many things that you could do. You could siphon it off and flood some of the land that is not being used to rebuild the topsoil. I mean, if the mines along the river came together and devoted themselves to thinking about how to make the river, not only how to keep it from flooding, but how to use this tremendous asset that God has given us. Now, we got 75 mayors that we're working with, from Minnesota and St. Paul down to Gretna and New Orleans in the south. It's 2,000 miles. What we did in Atlanta, we didn't go to the government to build our airport. We went to Wall Street. And we created enterprise zones. That's how we grew from 1 billion people to 6 million. 1 million people to 6 million. And after Katrina, I went to President Bush to try to say, why don't you make an enterprise zone 1,000 yards on each side of the Mississippi River and allow the cities and the businesses and the environmentalists to come together and do some planning and have that planning financed by Wall Street. Well, they looked at me like I was crazy. But that's what we've been doing in Atlanta. Atlanta doesn't go to Washington begging for money, and we're not going to get anything from the state capitol. We go to Wall Street, we go to Switzerland, we go to Holland. There's money all over the world. There's talent all over the world. But we've got to free ourselves from this governmental dependency and put together moral, civil society coalitions that have the freedom to change the world. Now, another thing. In Africa, there are people that we call witch doctors, voodoo, primitive, in Senegal, but they've been curing AIDS. For 30 years that I know about. And we have documented it with the Ford Foundation doctors 15 years ago. I asked them to give me a box. I said, send me a shoebox of these herbs. They don't want to commercialize it because they say this is the wisdom of our ancestors. It's not supposed to be profit making. It's supposed to serve humanity. And so they don't want American drug companies to charge. They charge something like 30 cents for a cure of AIDS. And so they sent me a box of these herbs. We melted them down into an extract. Sent that extract to the Center for Disease Control. They said, well, we don't have the capacity to test it, but they sent it to the Army laboratory that keeps all of the live viruses and disease cultures that they collect all over the world. And they tested this extract with 3 different types of AIDS, 3 different types of Ebola, and 3 different types of hepatitis in petri dishes. And if they put a couple of drops of this extract in these little dishes, somehow it killed all of the virus in some 23 different viruses that they tested it on. Now, we've got to find a way to make that, expand that. The drug companies are not going to give us money. Most foundations are not going to give us money to do that. But we're trying to figure out how to make that happen. And we've got some ideas now. Finally, they're making ships in Korea that are too big for the port here in Portland. And Maersk in Denmark has already ordered 60 of them that are too big for any port in the United States. And the Koreans are turning them out 1 a month. And before long, they'll be turning them out every other week. We're trying to figure out how to make them available to the East Coast from Savannah. And we happen to know Savannah pretty well because, well, for a lot of reasons. But anyway, they have a continental shelf that goes out 300 miles. So we're talking about building a port 20 miles offshore, tethering these big ships to this port offshore, and having flat-bottom barges come up and offload them at sea, and they can go into the harbors in Charleston, Savannah, Brunswick, and Jacksonville. And it's not as expensive as it is to try to dredge the Savannah River. But it's change. And governments don't like change. Business needs to know that it's going to make plenty of money before they change. But so we're taking the lead from a civil society point of view and talking to the longshoremen who love the idea, and who are talking to enough business people in Rotterdam so that they say, this is exciting, we can build it, we can finance it, we can run it for you. But it will change the way the South does business and maybe change the politics of the South if we can do this. So I gave you my bucket list. Get your own. And then, or come on board and help us. And it's going to be all right. That the Lord is still on the throne, I told you. And don't ever question that. And you may not understand it now, but you'll understand it by and by. When the morning comes, all the saints of God will gather home. We'll tell the story how we overcome, and we'll understand it better by and by. Lord bless.
By and by.
Let me say a few words here.
One thing is, there's plenty of food on the table. Let's not let it go to waste. Kiko's handing out boxes. Please take food with you. There's no sense in leaving it. And believe me, no one person can keep what's left. So please take the food, and then if you would like to make a donation to the Andrew Young Foundation, there's some envelopes over there. Feel free to take an envelope and leave something in it. You can make it out either to the Holistic Peace Institute, we'll pass it on, or the Andrew Young Foundation. Either way, it'll still get in. So thank you all for coming, and it was really great to have you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, get boxes are over there. I'll go try and get you some more.